Bridgerton quickly became a sensation among the audience when it came out, equally for its captivating plot and its lively portrayal of 19th century attire. Not only were the costumes historically accurate, which is rare in shows, they were also very visually appealing. The mastermind behind these costumes, Ellen Mirojnick, ended up designing around 5,000 costumes for the first season alone. In this video, we'll talk about the costumes on season 1 of the super hit show Bridgerton. First up, the historical accuracy of the costumes. Historical accuracy is something most shows overlook when designing costumes, just for the sake of visual appeal. But can a costume from the Regency period still be made to look appealing to the audience without compromising on the historical design? Yes, and Bridgerton does it well, with its 19th century silhouettes and eye-catching colors. With just some tweaking in the fabrics and the color palette to make them more 1950s Christian Dior inspired, Ellen Mirojnick managed to create designs accurate to the period while making it modern and scandalous. Despite not being 100% historically accurate, the designs are much better than many others that we've seen on shows over the years. Not to mention, these costumes finally give us an escape from the Austen-esque designs that we're a little too familiar with in period dramas. This show is sexy, fun, and far more accessible than your average restrained period drama, said Mirojnick, and her work speaks for her claims. The designs incorporated organza and tulle, which not only allows a lot of movement and fluidity in the design, but also allows a beautiful transparency of layers that really make you stare and fall in love with the costumes, along with the characters that carry them oh so well. Coming up, let's talk about the eye-catching color palette of the costumes. The show very smartly uses its color palette to emphasize on different aspects, from colors representing a certain character's personality to setting a romantic mood. The costumes, along with their colors, let us in on the character's personal life, personality, and social status. For example, Penelope wears yellow. The color at first sight represents her bright and fun nature. We see her humorously bring up her dislike for the color during the season, yet she wears it all season long. The color yellow was a very fashionable color in the Regency period, and mostly worn by women looking to marry. Similar techniques were used with other characters to subconsciously tell a narrative. We created a palette that was inspired by Genevieve Figgis's paintings, Mirojnick says. The bright, saturated, and lively colors from the paintings have been wonderfully incorporated into the design, not only for visual appeal, but also to tell an interesting story. The colors of the show feel fresh and vibrant, while having a romantic aura around them. Bridgerton takes a new approach to historical fashion by using a more modern color palette, and it pays off with their costumes that offer a fresh breath of air in comparison to the gloomy colors used by other period dramas. Let's learn about how long it actually took to create these costumes. Now keep in mind, the show moves around the elites of Regency London, and they had to look the part for it. That means dripping in jewels and feathers and fine garments while each character tries to outshine the other. This is not achieved overnight, now is it? For season 1 alone, a huge team of 238 costume designers worked day and night to create a total of 7,500 costumes to bring this Regency fantasy to life on screen. From pattern cutting, embellishments, corsetry, embroidery, to the powdered wigs and pearls, the costumes exude a feeling of wealth. After a tiring 5 months of work by the talented costume team, a total of 5,000 costumes made the cut, which is still a huge number, considering it's only for one season. Imagine the amount of costumes the show will need for coming seasons, given the show's growing popularity. One of the main characters alone, Diamond Daphne Bridgerton, played by the wonderful Phoebe Dynevor, was fitted for over 104 costumes on camera. Even for a main character, that's still a big number compared to some of the other shows. It all works out in the end though, with an unmatched aesthetic that combines the elegance and grace of the 19th century fashion with contemporary design elements. Now let's look at what's actually historically accurate about these costumes and what's not. Well, for starters, the costume designers got the silhouette of the Regency period pretty accurate, which is a very impressive thing to make such an unflattering silhouette with the dress's waist right under the bust and a pretty columnar skirt look so appealing to the contemporary audience. A lot of designers shy away from recreating the design of this era, but the costume makers on this season really did the designs justice. More so, the corsetry surprisingly was pretty on point too. The corsets, or a more accurate term, stays, worn by the upper-class women were smaller than the corsets we see in the media. The stays were meant to keep everything up in place and functioned somewhat like the modern-day bra. Unlike the Victorian corsets, they don't go down to your hips and give you a cinched waist, but rather were a crop top length. Speaking of corsets, something that really stood out to the fashion historians was showing the stays being worn on bare skin. Not only would doing this have been very uncomfortable, it would have been not the most hygienic either. A slip was worn under the stays, to keep everything modest. A slip is a nightgown-like garment that was worn by the women at the time, under their stays and corsets to keep the corsets clean and have some coverage. Another inaccurate detail is the absence of bonnets. Bonnets were worn by women of all classes and were quite the buzz, but keeping in mind the show's desired aesthetic, it makes sense why there would be no bonnets in sight, and they aren't the most fashionable and romantic for most people today, unlike the peeps of the Regency era. Let's learn more about the men's costumes in the season. Although the major silhouette is really close to being completely accurate, there's still some inaccuracies. But first, let's talk about what the designers got right. The shirts, waistcoat, and tailcoats are all pretty much the same as worn back then. Another small detail they got right are the watch fobs, something used even today by some people for its timeless class. Another thing that viewers noticed were the incorporation of the classic top hat and cane in the men's costumes. Although not getting a lot of screen time, they do make an appearance on the show. Now for some of the things they changed in the costumes. One of the major things that fashion historians were quick to point out were the pants. The pants worn by men in this season were much more loose and darker in color than the ones that were worn by men of the 19th century. The pants worn in the Regency period were almost skin tight and mostly white in color. Overall, the men's fashion is far more accurate as compared to the women's fashion on the show. Let's look at what inspired Ellen Moroznik to create these costumes. Of course, Regency-era fashion played a huge role in the designing and creative process. But what were her main inspirations for the little tweaks she made in the otherwise historically accurate designs? Well, looking at the remarkable color palette, it's definitely one of the most outstanding elements of the costume designs on the show. As we've mentioned before, Ellen Moroznik says she drew the inspiration for such a lively scheme of colors from the artworks of Genevieve Vigas, an Irish artist who used vibrant colors to portray macabre imagery in her paintings. For the design of the costumes, her goal was to make the costumes feel romantic and beautiful, as if exuding grace and seduction while keeping it true to the rather modest 19th century fashion. She took inspiration from the Christian Dior Designer of Dreams exhibition, which she mentioned provided a wealth of inspiration for the costumes in this season. Now for how the costumes were given a modern feel. Keeping up with the sexy vibe of the show, the costumes were made to feel a lot more modern. The necklines are scooped and perfectly fitted on the bust, as opposed to the historically accurate straight necklines. The show offers openness in comparison to the restricted typical period dramas. It's flirty and it's fun. Up close, the revealed skin of the bust exudes beauty, according to Ellen Moroznik. And of course, some other tweaks in the design that were talked about before in this video were used to give the costumes a more modern feel, such as the looser, darker pants for the men and the bright color schemes for the dresses, along with the absence of bonnets. And that's all we have time for in today's video. As always, we'd love to hear your thoughts about the many costumes in Season 1 down in the comments. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button for more content like this. See you in the next video.